Hello, friends and family. I wanted to make a video and kind of take a little bit longer time to make sort of a vlog about something that's been on my mind for quite some time over the last couple months, and say my personal feelings on it. I've gotten into a couple small conversations on Facebook about various segments of this issue, but I thought it would be useful to tie all of my thoughts and personal values together in one video, so that the video itself can hopefully create some really positive and productive conversation, and that I can even really for myself collect all of my ideas. And the topic at hand is the issue of the Black Lives Matter movement and my disagreements with the focus of the movement, and why I think that there are some very specific things that if we could put under the umbrella of what we talk about when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we could accomplish so much more together. And I want to talk about why that is. First of all, police brutality is out of control, and everybody knows this. It's out of control against every race of people, but of course, and particularly people of color. And there's not a secret as to why this is. It's well established that it's a result of systematic racism. And nothing that I'm about to say should discredit any of that and the tragedies that happen seemingly all the time and never stop. And they need to stop. But I think we could do a lot better about getting to that mutual goal that everyone has of equal treatment under the law and fair treatment by our police and our law enforcement. If we shift our focus as people and have a series of conversations. I fight for this simply because it's something I believe in. I believe every conversation is an opportunity to make the world a marginally better place. I think there's probably not too many more important conversations on planet Earth right now than this one, and it's why I want to continue the conversation in my own way. What I'm worried about this dangerous loss of focus, and what I'm talking about that, is that we've become so focused in on cases of police and videos and targeting of unarmed black men, and obviously sometimes women. But there are videos that you can find of violence against unarmed white people as well, and you probably don't know a single one of their names like you know George Floyd's. And that in and of itself strikes me as a disproportionate focus. Just because the problem has been skewed in one direction doesn't mean that is evidence that is the whole problem. Of course, racism is a part of the equation, there's no doubt. But police violence is about much more than race. And I'll talk about that in some ways. The other reason why I'm motivated to talk about this is I think we all share a common enemy. And the common enemy is that of a corporate-owned state, a state government and federal government that are owned by corporations that do not share the average American's interests. They pursue their own ends. When it comes to police, it's like, how do you see this playing out? You have massive defense contractors that make much of the military style gear and weapons that police have and purchase. And those defense contractors have quite literally members of our Congress, both in the Senate and the House of Representatives, on their payroll, on their dime. And anything that suggests demilitarizing or making the police less like a military occupation force, goes up against these very powerful defense contractors that don't just fund politicians while they're in office, but promise them a lifetime of funding when they leave. Even for some that are in Washington for a very, very, very short period of time. I think it's this mutual enemy that we have, the real enemy that we're up against, that it's sneaky, it's hidden, it's less well known, but it is facts that hide in plain sight. They're not a non-fact. They're just ones that is harder to connect the dots on. There's no conspiracy theory here. This is all things that you can Google and look up. The other part of the reason why I want to talk about this is I genuinely believe that the only tool that we have to solve problems is a series of successful conversations. These series of successful conversations need not and should not exclude people. Telling people that they have absolutely nothing positive to add because of the color of their skin, like some on the far left do, is by itself racism. I can never fully understand or appreciate the experience of a black person who has been unfairly targeted or treated wrongly by police. But it is also a fact that conversations that don't include all voices will break down. And you need to have voices who don't look exactly like you, don't have the same experience as you, and in fact, maybe have a very, very different experience than you. You need to be able to reach these people in conversation, because at the end of the day, to get this type of change done in a long-term and lasting way is going to require people with a very different standing in society to understand the viewpoint of those less fortunate. So their voice does matter in the conversation. While someone can't experience exactly what your pain is and exactly what you've suffered through, we all have the ability to relate and imagine. And these are very powerful tools that we can use to our advantage to mutually understand each other and work together towards a better future. I don't think there are many people on this planet that can fully understand what it was like to blame yourself for what was essentially rape because you thought you participated in a consensual activity at 11 years old, and that it may be sending you to hell because that particular thing that I did was homosexual and that was against God. I don't think there are a lot of people that know what that experience is like exactly. But there are a lot of people that I've talked to that find amazing ways to relate to some of the pain I've suffered through as a person, and find ways to also imagine, just how much worse it might be to be in my shoes about that particular problem. And we can do this on every level. Race is not an exclusion from this. It may be hard sometimes. Sometimes you have people who have absolutely no idea what it's like, but that doesn't mean that we can't have a series of successful conversations and connect people. Now that I've kind of laid the groundwork for my thoughts on this problem, I want to talk about what I feel is the biggest issue that ties all of this together. I genuinely feel that police violence, black on black violence, black inequality in the workplace, in general, people of color, wealth inequality, lack of equal representation in government, and virtually every other problem that faces people of color in this country has the majority of it rooted in the real evil which is wealth superiority and how that plays a role directly in our lives. The net worth of people of color, if you look at black net worth, it's 10% that of white families. If you look at Latino net worth, it's 12% that of white families in the United States. This is something that Andrew Yang may have been the only one who talked about it on the campaign trail. And it was something that other Democrat candidates, they touch on it, but they didn't tie it to numbers and didn't make this specific case in the way that he did. And I think the reason why he did is really Andrew Yang and I agree on something, that fixing the money side of this, while it doesn't feel great, and it doesn't exactly feel like it solves your problem when your, heart is broken over another unarmed black person that has lost their life at the hands of a police officer, it starts to solve a lot of the problems in ways that aren't readily available. Just to come back to the being able to relate and see similar stories and understand it, I grew up in a city called Lowell, Massachusetts, where the majority of the population of the city was Cambodian immigrants. And there was an immense amount of, I guess you would call it, gang affiliation, gang presence in that culture. There was also many Latino immigrants in the area. It truly is one of the more diverse areas of the country. And so many of the mutual ills that faced each community individually simply comes down to not having money. And I'll back that up with some interesting facts. I think it's also important to note that before I kind of explain my thoughts on this, voting won't solve this. Voting in the general election to elect Joe Biden is something we absolutely must do. We must reject the Republicans in November. They must pay a price at every level. Every single person with an R next to their name should have to pay a real and painful price for allowing their party to be overcome by, quite frankly, racist ideology. You see evidence of this that really knows no bounds anymore, all over the place. And a party that once rejected authoritarian type state control is now tacitly supporting the federal government stomping all over states' rights, marching secret police into cities, all in the name of law and order. All in the name of law and order, which is honestly two words that have been used to degrade people of color for a long time while ignoring the real problems. What I really feel is that this is going to take grassroots activism in the Democrat Party, and really hopefully in both parties. It's going to take grassroots activism and conversations like these in our own personal spaces so that we all understand what the serious nature of the problem is. We all have a little bit of information. I'm probably wrong about some of the things I'm saying in this video right now, and I probably don't have a fully accurate depiction of it. And none of us do. But that's why we need a series of successful conversations, or it will end in violence. If we don't fix these core problems and the gap between the wealthy elite and normal people continues to grow, society will break down. We either have a series of successful conversations or violence at the other end of the spectrum. And I don't see any way to avoid that. And I certainly think that that's absolutely true. I think that's the only thing, if you look throughout human history, the only way problems get solved amongst societies is either conversation or violence. And I think we all know we want to avoid the violence one. But in this course of we must vote and reject the Republicans, reason it's going to take grassroots activism is the Democrats need to understand that this is not tacit support of their defunct and horrible way of doing things. Because again, you and I have a common enemy that the Democrat Party does not. The Democrat Party is overcome with these big corporations that are screwing you and me, and they have this money coming in from all over the place. If you look, there's an article on CNBC this week, Kyle Kulinski covered it on his show, that huge money, big money donors just got behind Joe Biden and pumped $100 million into his election campaign. And these guys were keeping their pockets full all leading up through the primary, and we're not coming out for Joe Biden like this. You might remember he had some troubles in the news with not being able to really raise money like he had expected. And the reason why is because they were afraid for once that they were going to lose to Bernie Sanders and that it was all over for them. This free day of the corporations having their hold and their sway over the Democrat Party was coming to its end. And it fell out from underneath of us. But my gosh, the dream is still there, and we have progressive, anti-big money corporation people all over the place right here in Iowa. I'm so genuinely hopeful that Teresa Greenfield will be true to her word on this about taking, big corporate money. And I'm sure there's little ones that you can point to and differences. That's not what this video is about. But we have to reject the real enemy, and that's the fact that it should shock you to your core that there are corporations giving this level of money to politicians. Like, what do they get out of that? Do they do it from the goodness of their heart? Obviously not. They have nefarious intentions that don't involve making your life better. So we have to let the Democrats know through our grassroots support. And then the other problem is, especially when it comes to people of color, it has this opposite effect where you saw Joe Biden make this comment over the last couple months, and he talked about how if you have a hard time figuring out whether or not to vote for him or Donald Trump, then you ain't black. And you see, this is where the real evil and the real trick for black Americans come, and why they have not been able to have success gaining wealth and access and equality in the United States for so long. And I really feel this is the case. It has become a foregone conclusion that the black vote will be easily won by the Democrats. They take you for granted. Make no mistake. That doesn't mean you're wrong to do it. And it's certainly not the case. There is a nugget of truth in what Joe Biden said. After all, this is the guy who pardoned his buddy Roger Stone, who managed to 4 days later call a black radio host in Los Angeles a Negro on live radio. And it was so brash and so disgusting that it because it seemed like it was just something he's used to saying. And this is someone who's been friends with President Trump for a very long time. Also, we have reports from Trump's sister that he regularly uses the N-word. We have the very curious failure to discredit endorsements from, many prominent white supremacy groups. And then there's obviously the tweeting someone shouting white power and claiming that he hadn't watched the video where it's 7 or 8 seconds into the video where he's doing this. Maybe one or two of those things you could dismiss, but you can't dismiss the whole of the evidence. It's clear that the president is at minimum casually racist and maybe much more sinister than that. So Joe Biden is right, in the sense that if you are a person of color, I think you have a clear choice this November. But that's the problem. We must make them understand, this is the Democrat Party, that we support things bigger than them. Because Joe Biden does not support a universal basic income, Medicare for all. And this video, and why I was talking about the money side of this, I really want to hit home that I think these two issues solve more problems for people of color in the United States than any single other problem. Martin Luther King understood that wealth inequality would be the next biggest issue, and it would be the natural successor to the civil rights movement. This is why he was working on a version of a universal basic income himself when he was assassinated. But what happened during the Republican-run 70s and 80s was we got rid of one form of civil rights oppression with Jim Crow and created an equality of opportunity. And there was enough convincing that that was a wholesome and complete victory that I feel many Black Americans, I don't think gave up the fight for continued pursuit equality, but did get tricked by a message. And this message was that now that you have this equal opportunity because there's no legal impediment to you getting into the workforce, getting equal pay, having equal representation, you can start to accumulate wealth. And the reason why it's convincing is because it is true, right? You can now take part in the American economy fully. You have truly nothing holding you back. The problem is what it ignores is what is I've come to understand is the monopoly problem, and I have some credit to David Pakman's show for this one because I had not heard this analogy before, but he mentioned it, and then I went and read some stuff about it. But it kind of works like this. Imagine there's a game of Monopoly. We've all played Monopoly, where 3 players have gotten to play for an entire hour. They started with relatively the same wealth. They've started to grow and accumulate it through the game. They've all bought most of the properties and upgraded those properties. There's now hotels, and rents are now higher because of the houses and the hotels, and the rents have gone up. Imagine telling a new 4th player that they must play and they must participate in this game. But the only thing they're going to get after everyone else has gotten to play for an hour is just their starting cash. Just their starting $1,500. How well are they going to do? Does anybody think that they have an actual shot of winning? My guess is not. But yet a fair number of people say it is somehow morally wrong to take some of the accumulated wealth of the other 3 players and give it to the 4th person. We have this backwards, and I had it backwards for a really long time. We absolutely need a mechanism for wealth redistribution. And you might disagree or argue about how best to specifically do that, but it's clear there are 2 critical ways it must be done. We must stop the lies about Medicare for all. What it is wealthy, well-off, privileged people wanting to protect their ability to have special, privileged, and better off access to healthcare. They don't want their quality to suffer even one iota so that others can live and prosper and do better. This is their argument, even if they say it's not. You'll hear people say like, oh, the overall quality will go down. Look at the other countries that have longer wait times, etc. In other words, they think they deserve better healthcare than the people who are currently not getting it. That's what that statement is. And I used to think differently about that, but I've become quite convinced. And this affects Black and brown people more than many, many, many issues. And all you need to do is look up the infant mortality rate amongst people of color in the United States and look up the birth mom mortality rate just from having a child. And if we can't even get that equal, if we can't even get that right, that tells you we have a massive, massive, massive gap when it comes to healthcare. And yet I have met many, many African Americans that tell me Medicare for all is a dumb idea. And it's a bad idea. Some of them, it's because they've been in that well-off position where they have good insurance. And they are afraid to have any sacrifice personally, because once you get it, you don't want to take a single step backwards. But I think this is a real failure of compassion for your fellow person, and certainly not one any of us would do if we lived in a village scenario. Imagine, here's my analogy, that you live in a village with 100 people, and there's the one doctor, right? and you have some older folks and some people who are maybe less involved in the community, and then you have some people who are stronger, tougher, whatever. I don't think most people would be okay with the strong, tough hunter of our village pushing down the older and the less fortunate out of the way to give himself better personal access to the village doctor, just because he thinks he contributes more or he's better off. I don't think any of us would live with that morally, and I don't think we would do that in society, because really we're just one big giant village, and we should treat it that way. And so behavior that you wouldn't tolerate in a small village, you shouldn't tolerate it in your village at large, the United States. That's the first one. And the second one is what I feel is the real answer to reparations for slavery. It's the real answer to what do you do with the who deserves it problem. It's the real answer to so many of our issues, which is universal basic income. And I was fighting for this when I was volunteering and working for the AND campaign. But I've been realizing just how big of an issue this is. And here's how it ties back to the Black Lives Matter movement. Poverty and the lack of health care is the number one thing that makes Black lives much, much worse than police brutality. And in fact, it's part of why they end up in situations where they're more at risk to suffer from police brutality. Police tend to be harder on low income, higher crime areas. And there's been a connection to income and crime for forever. Turns out when you feel like you have no economic options, it's much more tempting to do crime. And what would a society look like if we decided to cover those people's basic needs and abolish poverty with one sweeping proposal called the universal basic income? Something that provides money to all citizens of our country equally. And we can do this. We can do this by taxing the money wherever it moves. So it doesn't just come from individuals. It comes from when giant corporations make luxurious purchases and do things that screw over the average person. We tax every situation where money moves around in our economy and just spread it around to everyone evenly. And because everyone gets it, and because it's just part of your citizenship in a way that we can thank each individual in the United States, we can thank them and say, your country appreciates you, your country values you, and here is enough to cover your basic needs. When we do that, we flip the script on the whole thing, because people will start more businesses in communities that have not done well. They'll fix their homes and build new ones. They'll fix their cars or buy new ones. They will start to steadily improve their lives. The real truth is, those people got held out of the monopoly game. And when all the getting was good, they didn't get to participate. And now you have people like Ben Shapiro and many others on the right who come out and they say things like, well, it's equal now, so you should just go out and get a job, choose not to do evil, choose not to do crime. There is some personal agency here, but it's not as much as those on the right think. And the solution can't be to just throw them to the wolves, because if we treat them like that fourth player in Monopoly, let me ask you this, really down to your toes. Would you want to be the one in that game? Would you want to be the one who comes to the Monopoly game an hour late? Or would it be filling with despair? Understanding that the table was set against you from day one. This is why I think money really is the root of all of this. And all you have to do is look at the connection between poverty and crime, and the connection between white wealth growth in the United States of America before the Civil Rights Movement, and then after, and then compare black financial growth before and after. And when you find out that the Civil Rights Movement did not all of a sudden create an opportunity for wealth creation for Black and brown Americans, you will realize that this has been the single biggest problem from day one. And that's why grassroots support of universal basic income and Medicare for all should be your focus. You should focus on the candidates who support it. You should focus on the organizations who talk about it. And you shouldn't tolerate a single Democrat leader who doesn't get it. I really believe this. That is what my goals are, and that is what I will personally continue to do, because that's, I think, the way that we can make Black lives actually matter. And if we don't focus on this and instead we worry about something that, just being honest, only kills 1,000 people a year, which is police violence, and not all of them are Black, we're missing the mark, and we're missing the opportunity to make real change and do something that would be so much more positive in these communities. And when the first thing that's going to happen is they'll cave on the symbolism and make you think that it's getting better, all while you still believing that you're part of a meritocracy where you have this equal opportunity where you can get back into the game, and the Monopoly game was stacked against you from day one. That's why this should be your whole focus. And I hope you consider that in November. I hope you consider that in every election after it, and support the candidates like Yang and like Bernie Sanders that actually want to make the real changes that take the power back from the corporations and give it back to you and me, the people. Thanks.